know about all the acts. Okay, so although we're only looking at 3 acts today, there are certain things that you need to know about all the acts. You need to know what the purpose is of all the acts. You need to know what the impact is of that act on the business. And remember, when we use the word impact, we say that those are positive and negative impacts. So you have to be aware of both the positive as well as the negative impact of the relevant act on the business. Then you also need to know the actions that are regarded as discriminatory. So anything that discriminates about the act that you're looking at, and also penalties that the business might face for not complying with these relevant acts. And then finally, you're usually asked to recommend or suggest ways that the business can comply with the act. So these are standard questions that could be asked about any act. So even though we're only looking at 3 today, these questions could be asked about any of the acts, and then there are a few other questions that's specifically related to the individual acts. Okay, so another guide before we start looking at the work. It is important to know how the work is marked and how the mark allocation is set out. So just to remind you that when you see these action verbs, you need to be aware that it's normally a short answer or a short phrase that you have to give, something you just have to identify from a passage, and it's only going to be worth 1 mark. So you don't need a detailed long answer just to get that mark. You're only going to need that 1 word or that phrase that they might be looking for. So those verbs that they are using for the 1 marks only is going to be give, identify, list, mention, name, and state. So when you see that action verb, grade 12s, you must know that's going to be a short answer and it's only worth 1 mark. They're only looking for the crux of the facts, so only the important part, and that's why the mark will be allocated to you. Then when you see these action verbs, 2 marks will be allocated at the end of the statement. Okay, so you're going to make 1 full statement using a full sentence, and the marks will be allocated at the end. So again, they're only looking at the important factors. Somewhere in your sentence you need to have the important factors, and 2 marks will be allocated for that. So you don't have to go into an in-depth explanation. You simply have to answer the questions that have been asked. And those action verbs are classify, name, suggest, advise, propose, define, outline, recommend, motivate, and state. And then finally, these are the action verbs that are used when we would like you to go a bit more in depth in your explanation. So you're going to have to make a statement, and then you're going to have to clarify the statement. You will get 1 mark for making your statement and a 2nd mark for clarifying the statement. So when you see these action verbs, grade 12s, describe, explain, distinguish, discuss, analyze, elaborate, show impact, applying a technique, evaluate or evaluation, differentiate, compare or comparison, tabulate, and justify, then you know you need to have a statement which is followed by a clarifier. And as you see, as we go through our presentation today, we will be showing you how the marks are either going to be split or how the marks are added at the end, so that you can get used to seeing where the marks are allocated. But it is important to familiarize yourself with these action verbs, because it makes your planning of how you're going to be answering the questions a lot more easier. It will save you a lot of time knowing when not to have to clarify your statement, and also will make sure that you know when you have to clarify the statement. Okay? Right, so grade 12s, what we're going to be looking at first is the Labor Relations Act, and Mr. Van Zyl will be taking you through the Labor Relations Act.
Thank you, Mr. de Klerk. Guys, before I start with the Labor Relations Act, maybe we need to look at the name of the act itself, the Labor Relations Act. Now, what that basically means is this act governs the relationship between the employer and the employee. So if you want to, you can highlight the word relation, and you can then go and say relationship. Then we know that it governs the relationship between the employer and the employee. Now, guys, before I continue, I just want to state this. For every act that we're going to do, it always starts with the purpose of the act. If we know well what the purpose of the act is, then any other provision, impact, all of those things are easier to remember if we understand why it is there. So without much further ado, let's start. Now, guys, in your booklet, you have had the 1.1.1 there that says the purpose of the Labor Relations Act. and that is where we're going to start. And there was a table there, and you need to write in the concepts that is missing from that statement or from that sentence. So if you want to, you can just write it in, but in the following videos, it would be nice if you guys would have done that before you actually see what we're going to do next. Right, so let's quickly go through that. Number 1 says, provides and there is a framework or a structure for labor relations between the employer and the employees. Right, next one, promotes collective bargaining. Now guys, I just quickly want to set a bit on the collective bargaining thing. Many people have difficulty understanding what collective bargaining means. Now guys, the word collective means we as a group of people negotiate with a group of people collectively. So guys, in the past, if there weren't any collective bargaining, if you want a raise or you want to negotiate with your employer for an increase in salaries or working conditions, you had to go and negotiate by yourself with your employer. And as you guys would know, the employer is the one paying the money, so that relationship was then skewed towards the employer. The employer had all the bargaining power. So now we say, hang on a second, we need to regulate this relationship so that we can share power. So therefore we do it collectively. And the way they do this, employees are no longer doing this by themselves. They are part of a larger organization called a trade union. And a trade union negotiates on behalf of everybody in that sector, with the employers or all employers in that specific sector, and then they bargain on wages, working conditions, or whatever the case may be collectively. And when there's an agreement, we call it a collective agreement, then it's binding on everybody in that sector. So that is what the word collective bargaining means. We as all the workers represented by our trade unions will negotiate as a whole with the employers or their organizations collectively. So then it leads to a collective agreement for everybody. Right, so it promotes collective bargaining at the workplace. The next one says, promotes workplace forums. Now that is, if you can see on the screen there where the marks are allocated, promotes workplace forums. Now we're going to say, what does a workplace forum do? That is your qualifier. To accommodate employees in decision making. Now guys, I just quickly want to explain to you the concept of a workplace forum. When a business has 100 or more employees, the Act says they now need to facilitate a workplace forum. Now guys, a workplace forum is where employees are invited to take part in decision making. So the decisions are not just coming from the business, from the top down and imposed on workers. They are part of the decision-making process. So that is what a workplace forum is. Now, what is most important, guys, a workplace forum is not a trade union. A trade union is a representative body for all employees in a specific sector, like you would get the National Union of Mine Workers, that is in the mining industry. A workplace forum is not industry specific. It is for that specific business that can enact this workplace forum. And the employees that serve on that workplace forum can be unionized or non-unionized. So it doesn't matter whether they belong to a trade union or not. If they are the representative on this workplace forum, they take part in the decision making. So workers then take part in decision making, especially on issues that affect them. So that is what a workplace forum is. Important to remember, if a business has 100 or more employees, they have to set up a workplace forum. The 100 or more in Acts is very specific. Those specific numbers you need to really know. Okay, so promotes workplace forums to accommodate employees in decision making. Then the next one says establishes labor courts and labor appeal courts. And the last one, promotes simple procedures for the registration of trade unions and employer organizations. Now guys, just to make it easier for you to remember, an employer organization is an organization is almost like a trade union, but for employers that they belong to, just like workers belong to trade unions. Okay, so that is the purpose. If you understand the purpose quite well, then the rest of the act is actually easy to remember. So right, the next question said the impact of the LRA. Normally this question will come to you in the form of discuss the impact or evaluate the impact. Now what you would need to do then is you can respond either positively or negatively, because an impact can either be positive or negative or both. Now, I always tell my learners not to try and remember a load of advantages and a load of disadvantages. When you get that question, you can respond either positively or negatively. So how I would like you to remember that is to go and remember 2 positives and 2 negatives, because if the question in section B counts 6 marks, you can have either one of those 4 listed down there or discussed at the bottom, and you will get both your marks. Right.
I think that's quite an important fact there, Mr. Van Zyl, because there's lots and lots of information, lots of positives, lots of negatives.
Yes.
So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you have to know absolutely everything.
No.
Just help yourself know about, like you said, 2 or 3 of each, and that will give you more than enough information to get the marks.
Yes.
If it's in section B, it will be between 6 and 8 marks maximum. If it's in section C in the essay question, probably at most 10 marks or so. So put yourself in a position where you know 2 or 3 of each, and you'll have more than enough.
Yes.
So pick the ones that you can remember and work with those.
That is absolutely so. I know I've marked at the end of last year, or actually the beginning of last year, the end of last year's exams, and I can tell you with utmost certainty that the most a question counted in section B was 6. In the past it used to be 8 and 10 mark answers. We are no longer there. It is now 6 mark answers. So if you remember 4, then you leave yourself a bit of room for section C, because there it can still count 10 or 12 marks. But in the entire question that you get in section C, then it doesn't matter if you lose out on 4 marks per section, because you can still make
up somewhere else.
Make it up somewhere else. So I would not remember more than 4 marks of either advantages or disadvantages. It's better to leave yourself a bit of room and make certain that that if the question comes to you in a weird form that we don't know about, then you know advantages and disadvantages. But don't go and try and remember and cram all that information in your head. Business studies is a very big factual driven subject, and it's a lot of facts to remember. I would not do that. Okay, right. So let's quickly go through the impact. In terms of advantages, things that's to the benefit of the business, because you would see that the question which says the impact of the LRA, and it's normally only on businesses that you would need to know for these acts. So the impact of the LRA on businesses promotes a healthy relationship. Remember, the whole purpose of this act is to govern the relationship between the employer and the employees. Protects the rights of businesses in labor-related issues. Now, guys, both the employer and the employee has rights under the LRA. So it's not skewed towards one party or the other, because the whole purpose of this is that relationship must share power. So both the employer and employees are protected. So therefore, it protects the rights of businesses in labor-related issues as well. The next one, labor disputes. Now, guys, a dispute is when there's a disagreement between organized labor and the employers. They are not in agreement on wages or working conditions or hours of work or whatever the case may be, and they then lodge a dispute. It is something that is difficult to get past. It's a deadlock in the negotiation, and that is called a dispute. So that dispute needs to be settled in which way or form. So labor disputes are settled quicker and are less expensive, and it's normally done through the CCMA, or the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. And basically what they do is they mediate or they arbitrate as the third party in the dispute between 2 other parties, and that is a free vehicle or a free tool that they can use in order to settle disputes. Right. The next one, protect employers who embark on lawful lockouts. Now guys, a lockout is when there's a dispute and you want to make sure that the employees do not go on a go slow, or what they want to do is maybe break or sabotage your business. I can then embark on a lawful lockout, so I refuse them entry into the business, and that means that they are also not at work, so you don't need to pay them if it's a legal lockout when negotiations between the parties fail. Right, in terms of the disadvantages, productivity may decrease if employees are allowed to participate in the activities of trade unions. Now guys, one of the provisions of the Act is I need to allow workers to participate during working hours in activities that is related to trade unions. Maybe they want to get the support of more members, or they want to, want to recruit members. Those are activities, and you're allowed to take part in these trade union activities during working hours.
Yeah, or if there's a dispute, then those negotiations and discussions will take place during work hours, because the trade union also operates during those hours, which means during that time you're not working, so you're not productive.
Yes.
But the Act makes provision for that to happen.
Yes, and of course, a strike is an activity of a trade union. So guys, this Act actually says in one of the provisions, a person is allowed to strike if it's a lawful strike. Maybe later on we can speak about a wildcat strike or unprotected strikes, but if it's a protected strike, they are allowed to strike. You cannot dismiss a worker for participating in a protected strike. What I can do, however, is I don't need to pay them if they are on strike, because they're not working, and therefore no work, no pay principle. Right. The next one, cost of labor increases because of legal strikes. That is when people are not at work and they are not producing anything. And if they're not producing, I don't have anything to sell. It costs me money to keep my business open, but nobody actually working there. Right. So the cost of labor then increases. Reduced global competitiveness due to lower productivity. Now guys, remember, if workers are on strike, they're not working. That means the business is not producing, and that not producing is part of productivity. Now maybe it is one of the big issues with the Labor Relations Act, where trade unions use the right to strike sometimes as the first resort to put pressure on negotiations right from the start. And that makes South Africa a very unproductive workforce, because we are losing quite a bit of man hours every year due to strikes, which is a problem at the moment. Right, the next one, employers may not dismiss employees at will, as procedures have to be followed. Now guys, there's also somewhere in this act, acts that can be seen as immediate unfair dismissals. Now there's quite a number of them. I cannot fire an employee because of pregnancy. I cannot fire an employee because they took part in a protected strike, or any of those things that you guys can read up upon. Also, if I want to fire a person due to incompetency or something else, I need to go through a procedure, hearings, warnings. I need to show that I've tried to better the performance by training. It is not as easy as just getting rid of people, because then the relationship between employers and employees are compromised. Employers may not dismiss employees at will, as procedures have to be followed. Right. Now guys, the next one in this booklet was quite an interesting way of asking these questions. You will never get a question like this in a question paper, but this is a way for you to remember how these things are put together. It says, indicate which of the following statements refers to either discriminatory actions, the penalties for non-compliance, or ways in which the business can comply with the LRA. So let's quickly start with the ones that are the discriminatory actions according to the LRA. Now guys, discriminatory actions refer to things that we do that is to the disadvantage of employees, and it's unrightfully so. Okay, so let's quickly look at which statements had to go in terms of discriminatory actions. The first one, cancellation of employees' contracts by a new employer when a business is sold. Now, guys, when a business is sold, then the contract that the employee has is with the business, not the owners. So you cannot dismiss employees because you've taken over a new business and just pump it full of your people. The contract that the employee has is with the business, not the owner. Right, so that is a very important thing to remember. The next one, unfair or illegal dismissal of employees. There's a number of them that is immediately unfair. I've noticed or I've already mentioned a few of them. Another one could be that I want to dismiss a worker who refuses to do the work of another worker who is currently on strike. That is immediately an unfair dismissal, or unfair dismissal if you dismiss a person based on age or race or whatever those kinds of things might be. That is immediately unfair dismissals. Right, the next one, refusing the establishment of a workplace forum. Now remember the detail that I told you about. 100 or more employees, you have to enact a workplace forum. So that is one of the things that the Act compels you to do as an employer. So you have to let the employees then take part in decision making through a workplace forum. The next one, forcing employees to give up trade union membership. Now guys, this is an interesting one. The labor relations is brought into life that gives credence to a Bill of Rights that says freedom of association. We may join any organization that is legal or lawful to join to. That is a human right that we have under our Constitution. So guys, I cannot make a person, just because they work for me, give up their trade union membership. That is discriminatory, and that is not according to our Constitution. It's actually unconstitutional. Right, and the last one, preventing employees from joining trade unions. This Act gives a right to an employee to join or form trade unions of their choice. Remember, freedom of association. Right, now we are moving on to the penalties for non-compliance. This is what will happen to me if I breach the provisions of the Act. Now let's quickly look at a couple. If Mr. de Klerk, if you can just scroll for me. Okay, the first one, is it not coming up? Okay, fines for not complying with the dispute resolutions that was agreed upon. Remember, there is a collective bargaining process. Sometimes it gets into deadlock, and then you go through the CCMA, and then they give you certain things that you need to do. And if you are not complying with those collective agreements or with whatever comes from the CCMA, then you are in breach of this, and then you can be fined for it. The next one, employers may be forced to enter dispute resolution process. Now guys, this is when you go through the CCMA. Many times lawyers get involved. It's a long drawn out process. It costs a lot of money, and it is unnecessary. So if you don't comply to this, normally people will then take you either to court or to the CCMA, which is not to your benefit. And then the last one, financial costs of legal or CCMA fees and fines, and that is the same as the second one. Right. Okay, and the last thing that we are going to look at is ways to comply with the Labor Relations Act. Now guys, ways to comply. Normally this question comes to you in a suggest form. So suggest ways to comply with the LRA, and that just means, what do we need to do in order not to be against the Act? So with other words, whatever the Act asks us to do, we must then do. So if you understand the provisions, it is actually easy to get these suggest ways to comply part of any Act.
I think a little trick that they can use, like you said, if you know the purpose of the Act,
yes,
your purpose is your suggested way. So as long as you are then mentioning something that's aligned to the purpose,
yes,
you should get the marks for the ways to comply. And you'll actually see the way it's set up here. It is basically the purpose
Yes.
of the Act as well. So
Just-
that's why it's important, like you said, know the purpose of the Act.
Know the purpose of the Act is always very important. Now, I would actually say this. Let's just think outside of the box here. The Act says to you, if you have 100 or more employees, you must start or form a workplace forum. Now, ways to comply: form a workplace forum or allow employees to participate in a workplace forum. There's one.
There's one.
That is a way to comply. The Act says you may not unfairly dismiss people, so don't do that. That is a way to comply. So let's quickly have a look. Businesses must allow employees to form trade unions and participate in trade union activities or strikes. Now, guys, you know that the Act says that you are allowed to strike as if you're an employee. So how do I comply? My employees has given me notice that there's going to be a legal strike. I cannot now go and tell them you may not join the strike because then I'm going to fire you. Then you are not. Then you're outside of the Act. So the Act says that you just need to do what the Act says. The next one: allow or support the establishment of workplace forums. Employees should not be unfairly or illegally dismissed. Employees should not breach or ignore any collective agreement, which we have already said, and then disclose all relevant information required by trade union representatives to do their work. Now, guys, once again, a suggest question will never count more than 6 marks. Never. So don't go and try and remember all of these and parrot fashion learn. If you know what the Act says, the employer must just do that. That's a way to comply. If you can remember 3 ones that makes the most sense to you, and it's always double marks at the end. So you don't need a statement and a qualifier why you say so. Just the statement. Do not illegal or unfairly dismiss people. Do not. That's enough to get your 2 marks at the end. Thanks, Mr. de Klerk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Van Zyl, for that insight. Right, grade 12s, we're now going to move on to the National Credit Act, which will be followed by the Consumer Protection Act. Now, the National Credit Act and Consumer Protection Act, when you look at the facts that are under, are very similar in some ways, but they are actually very different. So a lot of grade 12s tend to confuse these 2 acts for various reasons, as you'll see, like I said, because the information sometimes seems similar and does apply in both cases. So make sure that when you're answering questions on the National Credit Act and Consumer Protection Act, that you are understanding what you are required to answer. Again, what's important is to know the purpose of the National Credit Act and the purpose of the Consumer Protection Act, and that will help you to distinguish between the 2. The National Credit Act is mostly there to make sure that credit is offered in a way that is fair to both the customer as well as to the business, and that all parties involved know what their responsibilities are. And the Consumer Protection Act, as the name suggests, is there to protect the consumer from being abused in any form, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later. So if we look at the National Credit Act, and more specifically the purpose, we see that it promotes the social and financial interests of consumers. Okay, so we can see the marks there have been split. Promotes the social interest, 1 mark, as well as the financial interest of the consumers. It promotes a fair but competitive credit market. And that basically means when it says promotes a fair market, it means it's fair to all businesses who offer credit, as well as fair to all customers who are going to buy on credit as well, but also competitive, which means that the businesses are able to compete in a manner that is fair, because the regulations when it comes to the National Credit Act will apply to all the businesses. Then,
Mr. de Klerk, maybe it's important to note here, the NCA was enacted because there's a lot of people in our country that are illiterate, or people that have very limited knowledge about how finances work, and those people are easily exploitable in our society with regards to credit. That is where you get loan sharks and these people, and those people then enter into contracts that they don't understand. They cannot get out of it, they can't repay it, so they basically are indebted to these people almost forever. It's very, very difficult to get out of it.
And the businesses were recklessly granting credit.
Absolutely.
Because there was, before the National Credit Act, so customers, like you said, were exploited. They put in a position where they now cannot actually afford that, but the businesses will be able to apply pressure and take legal steps against them, and then in the end the business might get their money, but the person is worse off.
Yes.
So that's why this act was actually in place, to make sure that there are criteria that needs to be met to ensure the customer can firstly afford it, and that the business is offering credit in the correct manner.
That's
to make sure that the customer is not being abused, perhaps by charging interest rates that's too high, or by looking at customers differently, saying, I'm going to charge you 10% interest, I'm going to charge you 5% interest, you my friend, I'm going to give you no interest, and so on. So it's just a way to make sure that everybody is treated the same, and that businesses are not exploiting, and in fact also helps the business, because now they're only lending money or selling on credit to people who can afford it. So it puts less financial pressure on the businesses when people can't repay their debts. But we'll have a look at that.
I just want to say one more thing, Mr. de Klerk. There's one thing that you guys can go and read up on, and that is the 2008 credit crisis that happened. It started in America, and it basically has to do with those reckless credit things that we are going to speak of shortly. So that's maybe, if you are one of those high flyers that want to know a bit more and make this alive, go and read up the easy forms to explain to you what happened in the 2008 credit crisis, and then you will understand why this act is so necessary.
Yeah. Right, let's look at the third bullet point in our purpose of the National Credit Act. It's there to ensure that consumers know what is included in their credit contract. Now, if you go and ask your parents if you can read any of the contracts that they've entered to, it might be a cell phone contract, might be buying furniture, any type of transaction where they've purchased on credit, every single detail of that transaction must be given to that to the consumer in a language of their choice, so they can understand it firstly, and every single piece of detail must be in there, so that if legal steps need to be in place, each party, both the business as well as the customer, knows the rights and responsibilities of that contract. So every person needs to know what is in their contract. Then the next point is to prevent discrimination in any form and make sure that credit is available to all consumers. Now, there's various different ways that you can discriminate in terms of giving credit. I've mentioned a couple of examples where you discriminate based on whether somebody is your friend or not, or whether somebody is of a particular religion or of a particular race, and so on. So in the past, you could have discriminated against them in that fashion, but now you can't, because if you qualify for credit, according to the National Credit Act's provisions, you must be granted that credit. And obviously, if you are not granted the credit, you must be given the reasons why you were not granted credit, so that you can go and work on that and perhaps put you in a position where you can purchase that item on credit. And the last aspect there is makes provision for the establishment of the National Credit Regulator. Okay, so they determine the terms and conditions of all the contracts of various products and services offered in the market. Okay, the impact, and again, important to know the impact here can be positive as well as negative. So just as Mr. Van Zyl said, know 2 or 3 of each, the positive and the negative. So the first positive impact is that there is transparency in the credit process, as all parties know their responsibilities. Now, the word transparency means that there's going to be no hidden agenda. All information is clearly available and accessible and understood by all parties involved in the contract, and that's why there is transparency in the contract and all parties know what they need to do. Then, authorized credit providers may attract more customers. Now, it's important to understand that not all businesses are authorized to sell products on credit. So it's important to mention in your answer here, authorized credit provider, because that will be your first mark, will be allowed or may attract more customers, because grade 12, not everybody is able to afford all the goods and services that's available in cash. Sometimes something's only available to you if you are going to buy it on credit, because you might not have all the cash available at that point in time. So what this National Credit Act does is it allows those customers who are able to buy for cash to do that, because most customers who can afford something cash will choose that option, so they don't pay the additional interest. But now also creates another market for those people who will not be able to afford something cash, and now they can buy items on credit. So it means that more people have access to purchasing the product. The only difference is when the payment will be made. And then the third positive impact is that there's lower bad debts for the business. Okay, so bad debts for the business means that when customers are unable to pay their debts, the business has to absorb that cost. So they will basically write that customer off as a bad debt, and they will cancel that debt, which means that customer has got the product or service already. They are in the process of paying it off. They no longer can afford to pay it off. So now the business has to basically accept that as a loss, and that is an added expense for the business. So now, because you are doing because of the National Credit Act, you have to assess whether your customers are able to actually pay you and see whether they can afford it. You will know whether your customers will be a potential bad debt or not. So those customers who can't afford the credit won't be granted the credit, and obviously that means in the future they will not be a potential bad debt. So it basically means that businesses will know who they're selling to, who can afford it. So it lessens the chances of bad debt, so it's less expenses on the business. And as we know, fewer expenses equals more profits. All right, the final positive impact there is that there is an increase in cash sales, as some customers don't qualify for credit, or customers don't want to pay the additional interest. So you'll often see that when something is sold on credit, in the end you're going to pay more for that particular product because of the interest that is added for, and that interest obviously is there which is a cost of borrowing. So some customers might now prefer to rather buy for cash if they have the money available, because they don't want that added expense of paying the interest. So some people who are in a position to either afford the product for cash or on credit might then choose to buy on credit, which means you're going to increase cash sales, and businesses obviously want cash sales because then it means they get that money at that particular point in time. They don't have to wait for the future to get that money. All right, the negative impact is that business can no longer carry out credit marketing. Okay, so they're not going to try and entice people to buy products on credit. They don't want to encourage people to go into the debt, or they're not allowed to encourage people to go into debt just to buy a particular product or service. So that's what the impact there is. Business can't carry out any credit marketing. Then it can lead to loss of sales, as customers may not be able to afford credit. So you might have a potential customer, but they don't qualify according to the assessment criteria, and now they can no longer purchase the item. So they can't buy it for cash and they can't buy it for credit, so it means you're losing that particular sale. Right, then there's also a lot of paperwork and administration. So automatically when you have a lot of paperwork and administration, that increases the cost, and it's also very time consuming because the person has to fill that paperwork out. That paperwork has to be assessed, and that takes a lot of time before you actually tell the person, yes, you can or can't buy the product, you qualify or not. That's very time consuming and very costly as well. And sometimes businesses have to employ more people to manage that paper load. And that is the fourth negative impact of the National Credit Act, where businesses need to now hire additional staff.
Mr. de Klerk, I just want to say something on the impact of the Credit Act. I've seen in the past when I marked at the NSC exams, oftentimes learners confuse the National Credit Act with just plain credit.
Yeah.
So they will give you the positives and the negatives of buying things on credit, but that's not what the question said. The question is referring to the act, not the negatives and positives of credit.
Yeah.
Or buying something on a credit card or on debt. It's not that. It's about the act itself, not the positives and negatives of debt.
Okay, thank you very
just
much.
Want to make that sure.
Right, then we move on to the discriminatory action, so things that go against the provisions laid out in the Act. And that is refusing to grant credit to customers based on gender or race or religion or any other difference in the customers. Okay, charging different interest rates to customers based on gender or race or any difference. And finally, blacklisting customers without making the efforts to recover debts. Okay, so once customers are not able to pay back their debts and they become a bad debt for the business, they may be blacklisted, which means they're going to have a negative credit record and they will struggle in the future, firstly, to get their name off that blacklist, because if your name is on that blacklist, you automatically do not qualify for any credit. Okay, so that puts the customer in a position where if they need to purchase something and they can't afford cash, credit would be the only option. If they're on that blacklist, they just automatically do not qualify. So when businesses automatically blacklist customers when they don't pay their debt, that is a very negative impact on that customer for their future debts that they might need. So the business first has to try and recover the cost in any way possible, and that obviously takes a bit of time as well, and it's a process in its own, and only once that process is complete can they blacklist that particular customer. But they can't do it automatically if the customer misses one payment, for example. They have to first recover the costs.
Mr. de Klerk, maybe it's worthwhile to note, in the past we have done quite a bit of the provisions. It's not necessary for them now. One of the provisions is it makes provision for debt counseling.
Yes.
So if a consumer finds themselves over indebted for various reasons, they may go for debt counseling, and then a debt counselor, that is a person who then goes to all of the different people that his client owes money to, renegotiate different terms or consolidate certain debts into one, and therefore recover the cost that way. But that process takes quite a bit of time, as you have mentioned. But the word there is debt counseling. A person has the right to go to debt counseling first.
Yes.
You can't just blacklist a person willy-nilly because they've missed one or two payments. There's a whole process. They need to be notified, then they can go for debt counseling and so forth. And of course, that's a big disadvantage for a business as well. We just need to remember that as well.
Okay, so if you do discriminate, there's going to be penalties for not complying with the Act. And let's take a look at these penalties. So firstly, the court may declare the granting of credit by the business reckless and may order the consumer not to repay the credit or part of the credit. So what that means when the credit has been declared reckless, it means that the customer or the business did not go through the steps to check whether the person is credit worthy or has enough credit to be able to afford the product or service that they want to buy, and yet the business still offered that credit. Okay, so that is reckless credit granting. So if the customer does not meet the requirements for the credit agreement, the business should not sell that to the customer, because it puts both parties in a bad position in the future. The business might not get the money, and the customer might not be able to pay back the debt, so that they might end up on that blacklist that we just spoke of. So if the business does this, or if the business does offer or conduct reckless borrowing, then the court might tell the consumer that we are going to evaluate the case, and it's found that the business granted this credit recklessly. The business should not have granted the credit. Therefore, they put the customer in a bad position. So the penalty is the customer no longer has to repay that debt. The contract is cancelled. The customer doesn't have to pay back either part of the credit that they owe, or may not have to pay back the entire debt that is left. The contract will basically be cancelled because the business did not follow the correct procedures. And then because of that, the business also may not demand payment or sue the customer for the remainder of the debt, and they may not what they call garnish the customer's salary or attach the customer's salary, which means when they attach the salary or garnish your salary, it basically means the money is taken from your salary before you received it and paid towards the people that you owe. And they may not do that if they granted credit recklessly. So that's the penalties for non-compliance. Okay, and lastly, we're going to look at the ways, or second lastly, we're going to look at the ways to comply with the Act. And again, as Mr. Van Zyl said, if you know the purpose of the Act, it's easy to find out how we can comply with the Act. And again, these are going to be recommend or suggest type questions, so 2 marks will be allocated at the end. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them. They are on page 21 in your core notes of last year's core notes. So credit providers must be registered with the National Credit Regulator. So you can only offer credit if you are registered with the National Credit Regulator. Businesses must submit an annual compliance report to the National Credit Regulator. Conduct affordability assessments to ensure the customer has the ability to meet their obligations. So that basically means they must do a credit check to see whether the customer can afford paying back that debt. And obviously, if they cannot, they must not then grant credit to that particular customer. Okay, then conduct a credit check with registered credit bureau. Could also consult the National Credit Register. Okay, so you can either do a credit check with the registered credit bureau, or you can consult the National Credit Register. Okay, and then verify the identity of clients, report suspicious transaction, train staff on their obligations with regards to FICA. So FICA is one of the requirements of borrowing funds. And then lastly, disclose all costs of loan. There must be no hidden costs. All of that should be in the contract with the customer. So you just need to know 2 or 3 of these ways of complying with the Act. But as Mr. Van Zyl mentioned earlier, if you know the purpose, you can work out the ways to comply with the Act. Because whatever is in the purpose, that is what you can recommend or suggest the business do for ways to complying with the Act. And then finally, the rights of consumers with regards to the National Credit Act. So consumers have the right to apply for credit and be free from discrimination. They have the right to obtain reasons for being refused credit. So I explained that earlier. If they apply for credit and they go through the process of being authorized, if they are not authorized to receive their credit, they must be told why. It could be that there's something else that they are paying which means they now can't afford this, and the customer then can go decide to cancel that if they rather want to take credit for another product. Okay, but they must be given a specific reason so that the customer can go back and work on that reason, which now will make them eligible for obtaining funds. Okay, they must receive pre-agreement documentation before concluding any transaction. That's just basically to ensure that the customer understands all the provisions of that contract. They know what their rights and responsibilities are, and obviously that also needs to be in the language of choice of the customer. Okay, and obviously we have numerous official languages, so the customer can actually demand that pre-agreement as well as the contract be offered to them in their language of choice to make sure that they understand 100% what's in that contract. Okay, and then choose which goods they want to buy, so the customers can choose which goods they want to buy, and they can return goods if they are not satisfied, if the product is faulty, or if the product doesn't offer what it promised they offer. They have the right to then return that as well. And these last few also appear in the rights of the consumers when it comes to the Consumers Protection Act. So this is perhaps where learners tend to get the two mixed up, because here they're also speaking about what the consumers' rights are, or they are speaking about what the consumers' rights are, which is also mentioned in the Consumers Protection Act. And then finally, you can receive information in plain and understandable language. So that is the language of your choice that we spoke about. Okay, grade 12, we're going to look at the last act, which is the Consumer Protection Act, which was a essay question that was asked to you. I'm going to ask Mr. Van Zyl to quickly explain the format of the essay to you, or to remind you rather about the format.
Right. Now, guys, the business studies essay has a specific format. It always has an introduction and it always has a conclusion. Now, that word introduction has to be there. You have to write introduction and underline it. And then underneath that, there must be 2 facts for 1 mark each. That is the introduction portion. Then you will see that there's a question portion as well. The question says, give an in-depth analysis of the Consumer Protection Act by deliberating on the following aspects. Now you can see there are 4 different bullet points there. Outline the purpose of the CPA, discuss 4 consumer rights as specified by the CPA, evaluate the impact, and suggest practical ways in which the business could comply. Now, guys, those questions there is your headings in your essay. I would always use them for headings. Now, guys, you will then write your first heading, outline the purpose, and now you're going to write underneath. You would never know, because as you can see, there's no mark allocation added to any of these bullet points. So how much must I write? Now, guys, in these cases here, outline the purpose of the CPA, I would go for a 10-mark question. So maybe 5 facts is the maximum that it would be. The second one, now I'm writing a new heading, discuss 4 consumer rights as specified in the CPA. Now, guys, there's a specific number. Now, always when you see something like that, you would know that it's a name and explain type of situation. So you are going to name the consumer right. So that's your subheading. The heading is discuss 4 consumer rights. Your first one is naming. That is your subheading. The first consumer right, and an explanation next to it. One explanation or one of those bullet points that we will do next is 100% fine. And then the next one, there's 4 of them, and if you work it out, normally in an essay question, it's 4 marks each. 4 times 4 is 16 marks already. So now you've got, let's say, 4 bullet points for outline, that's 8. You've got your 16 marks there, that's 24 marks already. Now you get to your next question. Evaluate the impact of the CPA on the business. Now, if you could remember, I told you to remember 2 positives, 2 negatives. Now that will bring you to 8 marks. So that 24 plus that 8 marks already bring you to 32. And that's the maximum number of facts that you need to know. But guys, we're not going to stop there. We now have 32 marks that we are dead certain about. The last question says, suggest practical ways in which a business could comply with the Act. Now you need to write that heading, and you write something underneath that heading. You don't need to go now into too much details because we are certain that we've got our 32 marks. We write whatever we can in terms of the suggest practical ways, and there's the entire question answered. Now the last step is to write a conclusion. The word conclusion must be there, and you write one sentence or one statement for 2 marks at the end, one fact. Now guys, the importance of this is as follows. The mark allocation will be, you will have an L next to the word introduction. It stands for layout. It means that I understand that there must be an introduction. The word is there, there's something written underneath it, you will get an L mark for that. Now the marker normally goes down to the conclusion. See, there's the word conclusion, a conclusion is written, he gives you another L mark. So there you get 2 marks for layout just by writing the word introduction and conclusion and having something written underneath. Okay, the next thing that the marker is going to do is he's going to check if you've answered the entire question. So now he's going to check 1, 2, 3, 4 headings in your essay. It is all there. And now I'm giving you an analysis mark to see that you've understand how to tackle this question. So I'm counting as all 4 headings there, that you attempt everything in this question. So that will give you an analysis mark. So how many marks have you got already, Mahala? You've written something under introduction, written something under conclusion. That's 2 marks already. It might be wrong facts, but you already have 2 marks. Now they've counted, you've written the 4 headings there. Sometimes there's nothing written underneath the heading because you don't know. You already have another A mark. So there you already have 3 marks. Now let's say you've got 1 correct fact. Only 1. Then you will definitely get your 2 S's. Okay, so there's your 2 S's. And therefore, how many marks we got? 5 marks for not actually knowing the question. So guys, this is a very important format for you to remember. There must be an introduction, must be a conclusion, your 4 headings in your body must be there, and you need to make sure you write something underneath the introduction and the conclusion. That is just by way of saying to get your 5 Mahala marks.
Yeah, and then just somewhere in the body of the essay, you need two recent and relevant examples. So that recent and relevant examples means it must be recent, so within the 1 year period of whenever
within your matric year.
So with something within your matric year, and relevant, which means it must be relevant to what you are speaking about. Okay, so if you are preparing for essays, you should make sure then that you have also prepared your examples, and just remember that somewhere in between there, in the body of the essay, it must be included there, and label it clearly example, and then the marker will know that you are talking about the example. So if you quickly look at the question, you'll see there you have your leading statement. So remember, you can't use any of that in your introduction. And then I've highlighted the verbs so that you can see that outline the purpose is going to be 2 marks at the end of the statement. Discuss the 4 consumer rights. When you say discuss, they're going to split the marks. Evaluate, they're going to split the marks again. And then suggest practical ways. You're also going to have 2 marks then at the end of the statement. So then you know how to tackle the particular question as to when you need to give a statement as well as a clarifier. And then lastly, there we have the format. So this is a suggested format that you have. And you can see there that I've got an introduction with 2 bullet points. And you must just write something under that to get the layout mark for introduction. Then we have the purpose. And you see I've put maximum 5 bullet points for 10 marks. The 4 consumer rights, I've put it in the table to clearly indicate to the marker that here's the 4 that I'm mentioning. And remember, it specifies 4, so you can't write more than 4. If you do write more than 4, they're simply going to mark your first 4 answers and not look at the rest. And then we have clearly headed impact of the Consumer Protection Act in the business, again with 4 to 5 bullet points. Practical ways that business can comply, 4 to 5 bullet points, and then conclusion, 1 bullet point. And you can literally use the statements in the questions as your headings for the body of the essay. So that should then give you your free marks for the format, and then you can fill that up with the relevant information. Okay, so grade 12, I'm quickly going to show you where you can find this information on the core notes. So the purpose, you can look at the core notes on page 22. The rights of consumers you can find on page 23 of the core notes. The impact of the Consumer Protection Act you can find on page 22 of the core notes. The ways businesses can comply you can find on page 23 of the core notes. So we're not going to go in all that detail because it is there in your core notes for you. So that is all we have for you today. Thank you very much to Mr. Van Zyl for all your insight and your advice that you have given the learners.
That's fine, Mr. de Klerk, and thank you very much for being here. Guys, I'm excited for this year. Judging by the results that we had now, I'm foreseeing that we might have an even better year this year. So.
And it just shows that even with a year like last year, we can still get some good results. So that should not be putting you down at this stage, should be used as a motivation. Hopefully this year goes a lot better than last year, and you are all going to be put in a position where you can perform much better. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon further.
Goodbye.